We are now at our final session before the drinks reception, so I hope you won't dash off, because I'm sure you're thirsty. Our hosts, I hope she's in the wings. Where is she? I always slightly makes me anxious. I can't see my next guest. Our host from the Centre for Progressive Policy thought that this year, Marina Hyde, Guardian columnist and author of this best-selling book, What Just Happened, would be the best person to sum up the last 6 months. Actually, scratch that, probably the last 6 years, in actual fact. I hope Marina is listening so she can come in. Nope, she's not here. I'm just going to carry on introducing her then while somebody rounds her up. According to the information I've been provided with, this book looks at the period from David Cameron through Theresa May and Boris Johnson, and Marina considers how the UK evolved from what she thought was a stable, if underperforming nation, to one of perma-chaos and crisis management, in her view. Look what I'm doing, heavily caveating it, as a BBC journalist would. Having added 2 more UK prime ministers to that list in the space of as many months, Marina considers in the book how the political landscape might have an impact on our search for economic stability and shared prosperity. And as we look into 2023 and beyond, can we be hopeful that the conditions are right for inclusive growth? And if not, what does the future hold? Oh, thank goodness she's here.
I'm sorry. I didn't have a microphone.
Oh, right, okay.
What a nice venue.
Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it?
One.
But we've been commenting on how small it is. When you see it on the Christmas lectures, it looks huge, and it's actually a very nice, intimate space. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. I love some of the. I must read. I can't read all of them because some of them are quite rude.
So some of the books. Sorry.
Well, it is. I know. I was going to get you to read an excerpt, and I thought, no, I can't. It's a family show. Armando Iannucci, hilarious, but behind Hyde's wit lurks real anger. Her writing is more than a gentle poke in the ribs. It's a well-wrought and deftly aimed smash in the teeth. Phoebe Waller-Bridge, the most lethal, vital, screamingly funny truth-teller of our time. But you used to write about show business, although I believe
in a way I still do.
Well, yes, politics is showbiz for the ugly. Is that right?
Someone said that politics is showbiz for ugly people. I don't know who it was, maybe Jay Leno or someone. But yes, I mean politics has become much more like, I used to write about sport, and I still sometimes write about sport and showbiz, and in a way, politics has moved towards that kind of, in a way, I think the thing it's most like is the kind of mid-2000s, early mid-2000s reality TV boom, where, and it's, to me, it's not at all a coincidence that the biggest reality star of that era became the US president, which he couldn't have done had he not been the biggest reality star of that thing, because he was finished by the end of the 80s, really. It was, so I think it's kind of quite interesting. I think it's much more like a reality show. And all those people in reality shows were kind of chosen for conflict because they kind of fought each other, and that provided good kind of cheap drama. And in a way, I think the news started become, I actually have to say, sorry, I think rolling news is quite problematic on this front. And lots of radio programs that cover the news and lots of things, we always had this kind of intensely adversarial thing to everything. It became the way we covered everything. You know, even if you had someone who was like opening a Wordsworth museum, they would book someone to say, I think we have far too much time spent on the Romantic poets. It's like, well, can we not open a museum without doing it this way? So there's always that kind of, and I think that the news kept booking people, particularly rolling news. So it kept booking pundits who were, you know, it's much more interesting in a way, or creates much more drama to have someone from, I don't know, the Taxpayers Alliance, and then someone kind of much further left, and then just watch them fight on the news. And because it makes for better telly. And so I think almost all the ways that news was presented for quite some time was very polarised.
I'd like to just say that I don't believe all rolling news channels are made equal.
Listen, my husband works at BBC, and not in the editorial side, but yes, I agree with you that is not the case.
Thank you. I'm glad you do.
I've watched a lot of rolling news, and there is quite a lot of it.
Yeah, there is. Tell us about how you go about writing your pieces, your bits on.
Right.
Because sometimes when I read them, it's almost like this sort of primal scream Is that how it
Yes.
feels?
It's like, well, it's like I cannot. Actually, when I came to put the columns together for the book, I honestly couldn't remember writing half of them. And there's lots of words I don't actually know what they mean. Like, what's a fugue state? Do I write it in that? There's words I don't know what they mean, like neoliberalism, things like that. You have to tell me later. Anyway, but I use them, but I have no idea what they're gatekeeping. I don't know what it means. Anyway, so. I write them.
Do you want it? Do you want to hold it? Would it help?
No, it wouldn't help.
No.
I've seen enough of this book now. No, I write them in about, I don't know, I get up early and I have a blank document. I never start at the beginning at all. I never really know what I'm going to write. And I just end up writing things and moving them around. And then eventually, after about 2 or 3 hours, out of that primordial soup, a column staggers of varying quality. But I often don't really know what I think about something until, I've been through that process till I'm about 2/3 of the way down, and I think, oh, I see, that's what I think. So that's sometimes where there's sort of a bit of a needle scratch and a serious bit at the end. I actually worked out what I'm talking about.
What's the purpose of it? As satire.
Oh,
what is the purpose of it? What are you trying to do? Or you're not? Are you just trying to make us laugh, or just trying to get it off your chest?
It's very cathartic for me, I have to say. I think therapists always tell you to write everything down. And as someone whose job has just been to sort of, write my way through the news over the last kind of 6 years, when we slightly kind of departed the tracks into the realm of chaos in which we still now reside. It's been very helpful to write it all down and to kind of, I actually don't have unresolved news issues like a lot of other people do. But the satire doesn't change anything at all, and it never has in the whole of human history. And no one could point to a single instance, I don't think, of where it has changed at all. But what it does for me, I'm thinking of other people's satire now, is that it's such a comfort, it's such a balm. Apart from like if you're lucky and you laugh at it, I'm thinking of things like, I don't know, the day-to-day or the thick of it or whatever. You're laughing so much. And you also feel like you're being gathered up into a gang of, us against awful old them. And you're being given the way of looking at things. I think Oscar Wilde said something, just obviously being very facetious, that sunsets didn't exist until Turner painted them. And we didn't have the words for like the omni-shambles before we heard it on the thick of it. And now you see the omni-shambles everywhere. It gives you the words or the way of looking at it. And there is a real comfort in that. But in terms of things it changes, I don't think it changes anything.
Do you watch a lot of satirists? Because there are people like Rosie Holt,
yeah,
Michael Spicer.
It's great those people who've been able to just put it all on. Sadly, the platform is now being destroyed, but it's great those people.
You'll find them on Mastodon.
Yeah, will I?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I can't find anyone. Well, 1 or 2 people.
And so it's great that all these people have been able to sort of spring up and do these things. I've really enjoyed it, but it has been a sort of boom time for satire in lots of ways. Although someone once said that in this country we don't have revolutions, we have jokes, and maybe there's something in that. We do have a lot of great jokes, but we tend not to go any further. Perhaps it's.
How do you access your politics and politicians then? Because you're not sort of hanging out in the central lobby, are you?
No, I don't spend live time. No, I'm the same as everyone else. And in a way, that's what I want to be for my writing, because I want to be accessible, and in a way that's why I talk about politics a lot via the prism of, I don't know, sport or, I don't know, pop music, or also those are things that people actually like. So I think people sometimes quite like having something that they often don't like, politics, filtered through that prism. But in a way it's how I see it all, that kind of I think very associatively anyway. So I often will watch a cricket match and be thinking, oh, that reminds me of something that happened in Westminster yesterday, and vice versa. So, but I generally just watch it at home on the TV or via my, phone or whatever, the same as everybody else. And I think that's the kind. I want to be on the side of the reader, and I don't really do anything that has special access. Occasionally, I'll go to the party conferences.
When you started writing about politics, how conscious were you that you wanted to punch up, not punch down?
Well, when it came right for me writing about politics, although I started on a column on The Guardian, which was such fun, which was during the Blair years, and which was called The Diary, and we never really had any stories. We used to just ring up like number 10 and make sort of nuisance calls to them every day. And, they would answer your call and we would just try and say ridiculous things that got the phone put down on us. So I always had that sort of sense of, but that was a completely different thing because now we live in the perma-chaos and, it's like the Wild West. Politicians are out there on Twitter saying anything. During those years, it was so managed, and if you said anything wrong, and as an MP, Alistair Campbell will come and rewire your circuitry and you just wouldn't be able to, you wouldn't work anymore as a kind of New Labour droid. So in that sense, disrupting that really kind of heavy news management was funny. So there's always a different way to do it. But when I think I really worked out how I wanted to write about politics, which is kind of the last type of column I did that I felt like, oh, I see it's going right now, was actually really around the time of the referendum when suddenly things kind of derailed or were depending which way you voted. But either way, lots of people in my family voted the other way, but everyone would agree that it became quite chaotic.
And very divisive.
So.
I mean, and that's where you begin. This book, isn't it? Is it around the time of the murder of Joe Cox?
Yeah, I chose the piece that I wrote the day after Joe Cox was killed to open it because although lots of my columns use humour and in fact even often about serious subjects, I really wanted that to remind people of just how incredibly high the stakes are. Of course, politics is always a game in which the stakes are people's lives, ordinary people's lives, but I wanted to sort of remind you of how bad it can get right from the beginning, rather than you're going to get lulled into it and then,
Yeah. How often do you meet the victims of your pieces? You don't. You
Martine, I don't spend any. No. There used to be this old.
It's very wise, possibly.
There used to be this old critic in the Guardian, really back in the day. He's called Neville Cardus, who was a kind of legend, and he always used to say he didn't really want to meet politicians because it would dilute the purity of his hatred, which is quite extreme. But I don't actually. The reason I don't spend time is because I'm sure they wouldn't want to spend 1 second with me, but is because. I really am quite British, and I know that if I was part of some sort of drinks party circuit or some, whatever with these people, I would self-censor and I would just end up not writing things because I think, it's a bit awkward. I had a few minutes of drink, but I know I would. I know what I'm like.
Actually, I can recommend a bit of time in Strangers Bar.
Really? Yeah. Can you? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'll maybe I'll get there one day. But but also. I don't really need to, unlike lots of journalists who are brilliant and have to cultivate lots of different politicians in order to get news stories. I'm just the idiot who swans in and tells a few jokes at the end. So it's really, I don't really have to be friends with anyone to do that, and it makes it harder.
So you wouldn't want to meet them because you'd have to censor yourself?
I would end up censoring myself.
So you don't at all? There is no line that you wouldn't cross?
No, I keep reading about all these ones that are godparents, like Boris Johnson's children and things like that, but... I think actually every UK adult gets the call up for that eventually. It's like jury service. I've turned it down, but next time it comes, I'm going to have to do it.
Are there any politicians that you think you admire or might admire?
Yes, I suppose it's been quite hard to admire lots of politics over the last 6 years, particularly. And one of the things that I find quite interesting, but also quite worrying, is that you don't really see that many big ideas in politics, and you're more aware of big ideas happening outside, either in enterprise or in the voluntary sector. I'm seeing some amazing kind of huge-scale projects in aid. Just random examples like giving money directly to people, or obviously in tech. And you don't really feel there are any big ideas for how to get ourselves out of various holes at the moment. I mean, I suppose in a way, what Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng did was a big idea. It just was the wrong one and didn't work. But that you don't see so many. That sort of slightly worries me. So I find often people who I admire and who are trying to do big things, I find it slightly telling that they're outside of politics.
Or deliberately choose to leave politics because they think they can sort of circumvent it. And I'm thinking of...
and they think they can get more done outside
John
of it.
Woodcock and Justine Greening are the people who spring to mind who set up the Purpose Coalition.
Yeah, there are many people who feel they can do more in enterprise or the voluntary sector.
Isn't that because there are no simple fixes? And it's so easy for us to criticise.
Well, I don't think a big idea has to be a simple idea, but I think that it seems to me quite clear that the machine has been sort of taped up in lots of different ways since 2008 probably, and it's getting to the point where we do need some bigger ideas than what we've got at the moment, because it's not working.
What about the type of people that are attracted to politics? How problematic
it's
is
really
that?
difficult. One of my theories is that it's possible that because of where I will speak generally because there's all different ages in this room, but where we roughly come in the whole timeline, that people who entered politics or were in politics around the time of the Second World War and entered after the Second World War and had been kind of forged in the fire of that huge national event, they were kind of amazing people, and they'd all been through this thing, and they worked together, and also, even on opposite sides, and they achieved an awful lot, and they were kind of in lots of ways extraordinary people. But actually, if you go back into the 19th century and the 18th century, most politicians are pretty awful. And so maybe we've got this kind of rose-tinted view of what politicians could be like because it was within our memory when a different sort of type of person was involved in it. Now it's quite interesting. You've got two party leaders, both who've had very successful careers outside of politics, which is not, in some ways, what we've seen for a while. But it's interesting that they're both so risk averse in lots of ways. I wonder if there's something. Anyway, I'm digressing.
But I wonder how much of a problem those social media is, because you see politicians changing their minds within a matter of hours sometimes. And it's all reflected on social media. I mean, they seem to have a sort of collective amnesia sometimes about what they've just said. But how problematic is social media in the way that it fuels the nature of politics as it is now?
I don't think it's given us a huge amount, to be honest, has it? I mean, I think if we look at I think obviously people didn't understand what it was doing at the start. It's very difficult. It's obviously very polarizing, and that is a function of the algorithms, which are designed to keep people on the platforms by keeping them angry. It's literally that simple. And people who've left Facebook and people who've left other platforms will say that the algorithm deliberately sort of puts you in contact with confrontational content and things like that, because it keeps you angry, and the thing that makes people stay most on the platform is when they're angry, and you stay longest on the platform when you're angry. So there are big arguments for in fact sort of absenting yourself from it. But politicians are on social media and say quite extraordinary things now that it's really Wild West. You would never have I mean, I said, earlier about the New Year late beers, you just can't imagine. They had a little pager telling them exactly what line to say. And now you've just got the incredible freelancing happening.
Yeah, absolutely. But to what extent are voters to blame for the situation that we're in? Because I spend far too much time on Twitter, but most people don't, thankfully. And yet they still vote, and they vote for politicians who may not necessarily always act in their best interests.
Well, I mean, you can't change the voters. That's who there is. And I mean, I can understand in lots of ways why people have been driven to to make many voting decisions they have made with which I might disagree. Ultimately, people can be driven in quite sort of desperate ways to make. I mean, I remember going up to Grimsby in the 2015 general election, and I spent a couple of days there because Nigel Farage, by chance, was doing some event there, and I ended up spending a lot. I talked to loads of people in the town, and they said, "What would you do? Why shouldn't we vote UKIP? No one else cares about us, and the other lot haven't cared about us. Why shouldn't we?" And it's pretty hard to argue with somebody sitting with not very many opportunities. Why, and obviously, that was a big Leave voting area, but it's quite. It was interesting, though. You see someone like Farage on that exact trip where all his supporters had gathered for him, local supporters had gathered in a pub, and he had the chance to go and have fish and chips with Joey Essex from The Only Way is Essex. And so he just binned them all off and didn't go. And I thought, that's such a metaphor for you. You got them all to do this. And then you've just gone off with some telly star to look after yourself. But no, I can see why people make all sorts of decisions. I can see why people would vote for Trump. I mean, I wouldn't myself, but I can see why people can do it.
I wonder, though, as well, do we have a problem with politicians saying, look, I just don't know? Because we expect politicians, don't we, to have an answer at their fingertips on any subject at any point in the day?
I just expect them to just give whatever answer they want at that time. And I don't necessarily think we do. I don't think people do. I actually think out there that people no longer expect politicians to have the answer. And I think it's really interesting when you look at some of the polling that people have been banging on about this poll a bit recently, but there was a poll recently by a very reputable pollster that found 61% of 18 to 34-year-olds believe Britain would benefit from a strong leader who had no needs for parliament or elections. And I mean, people are turning, you can see people turning away. I find it really interesting. My parents' village in Hampshire, which you would think was the most they're turning away from all sorts of things. Some of the stuff you hear is unthinkable, would have been unthinkable 10 years ago. They just don't necessarily, and that's a sort of, I mentioned that example because you'd think it's a very sort of cliched sort of voting one way, whatever. But I think that people's doubt in the ability to solve their problems is on the rise. Conspiracism is on the rise. All these things are very worrying. Sorry, this is not an upbeat section of the chat. But yeah, so all of these things drive people to what you could class as desperate voting decisions, or to not vote at all. And, maybe it's possible that we'll see people coming through different kinds of populists. Obviously, you will always have someone, you can always expect somebody on the right, but who knows, maybe Martin Lewis, who people really sort of trust and feel like has actually helped them during the cost of living crisis and actually is listening to them and is trying to make their lives better. Maybe he'll come through. There's all sorts of possibilities. Someone like that, I can see it breaking apart much more than it has so far. I know we always feel our two-party system can't break apart, but I just think that there's at least there's ways through for different people now.
How warmly, how well disposed are you to the idea of yet more elected politicians if the House of Lords were to become an elected chamber?
It's very popular. I would go for it. Just try something
else to write about.
Try something different. I mean, it's so ridiculous now. I mean, it's. But 1 in 8 people in it have been appointed by Boris Johnson. No, but literally. I mean, I think that is the...
In here?
Yeah. But I think it's... So no, I think that's a ridiculous system. I don't know if they even go. Does Lebedev go? I don't think he does. I think he's been once.
Well, you only get about 300 quid a day, don't you, if you turn up. We're here to talk about inclusive growth, so I need to weave that in a none too clunky way, hopefully. I mean, when you look at the state of politics at the moment, how likely is it that growth can be made inclusive, do you think? Given that, we're riddled with identity politics quite often, it's immensely divisive, and you don't, as you say, you don't often see that sort of pan-political, cross-party work going on to the extent that you would want it to make sure that growth can be inclusive.
The possibility of growth at all seems fairly small. But people having to work together, I mean,
we've heard today, and you missed it, we shouldn't be as pessimistic as we would have been around 2008. So we're going to have a recession, but it's not going to be as bad as it might have been. So there's your bit of optimism.
Yes. However, some of our other fundamentals are less positive than they were in 2008. So I think that, I think that in general, there have been so many divisive things, and there are so many things that continue to seek to divide us. And ultimately, we are going to have to work much more closely together. And actually, really, when looking at the quite serious problems that are coming down the line, if we had less adversarial politics, I actually think it would be a massive benefit. And, you can see it on a tiny micro level, like families falling out over Brexit or things like that, different arguments about, whose auntie's got radicalised on Facebook, who's become a conspiracy, there's all these things. Anything that brings people closer together will, pay massive dividends. And this is why I get very depressed when people are just deliberately trying to play divisive politics, because I just think it's the flight from growth. And we've all had to become bizarre sort of. I mean, you probably all are experts. I don't know, but we've all had to become. Ordinary people have become experts in saying things like, you hear normal people saying, or online people are saying, this is a dead cat. This person's playing to their base. It's like, wow, everyone's become sort of James Carville.
Whistle.
No, but I mean, we've all had to become sort of experts in lots of different ways. People did it in America as well, and it would be lovely to think that politics could be something that you could ignore for 2 weeks and go back and it would be in a sort of similar place. Whereas, I've just done a book tour and half the time I had to go out, halfway through every night on stage, I had to say, is she still Prime Minister? Because I thought I probably missed it. Everyone was looking at their phones and knows something before me. But a period of non-chaos and turmoil would be most welcome. It's hard to get growth out of any sort of turmoil. I mean, I know people say creative destruction, but this is going quite far.
The division of Brexit, we've now got the idea of the Swiss model. So that's something else to argue about.
Yes, I see they're rolling that one back. We haven't got the idea. It's not happening at all. I don't know. I mean, I kept thinking when Jeremy Hunt suggested that in Chernobyl where it's like he's going to just you've got to do this terrible thing that's basically a suicide mission, and the Soviets got these guys, gave them some vodka and said, right, go out there on that roof, there's some stuff on it, just kick it into the hole in the middle. Don't worry what it is. And they give some more vodka in there. Don't stay more than a minute out there. Anyway, obviously it was a complete suicide mission. I sometimes wonder whether these guys currently in the government, maybe they think they're going to just take everything. They're going to try and take all the shit, and then we can move through it. We can move through it. I don't know.
So there'll be
that's the only reason I thought that they
sacrificial lambs.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you've got to have a fight at some point with the ERG or whoever or whatever, however they're going to be calling themselves. They're slightly less a bit spent as a force, but whatever they'll have to. Someone will, at some point will have to have a fight with the right on it. Especially as more and more people, it's quite interesting that the polling on people who now think Brexit was a mistake is going up and up and up, and you think, at what point will they actually have to acknowledge it? I don't mean, for a long time you had to think, okay, let's move on, it's done, and we have to move on. But now, with so many people saying, well, this is a mistake, at some point they're going to have to acknowledge it in some way. I'm not saying they reverse it, of course not, but they're going to have to acknowledge it at some point.
It is getting more traction.
But they will not talk about it or acknowledge it, which is another thing that makes people feel, why are we not being listened to? I didn't see it, but someone told me that on Question Time, which I don't watch because I can't be dealing with it, but watched it the other week and said, watched it on Thursday and said that actually neither Labour nor Conservatives wished to talk about it at all, and so essentially just couldn't really get involved or answer the audience's questions.
Yeah, there was a poll on GB News the other day as well that didn't quite go how they expected it.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah. I mean, I think at some point you have to acknowledge this and talk about it rather than, never mind speaking truth to power. I mean, if power can't speak truth to itself, then it's rather difficult to move forward with something sensible that is going to work and to bring about growth.
What would you write about if it settled down and went back to how it used to be?
Oh, I think I'd definitely forfeit the chance to. I'd find something to write about.
Have a lie down.
Celebrities and sport. But yeah, I definitely think that's a worthy sacrifice for everyone just getting a few calm.
But it's a way off, you think, before it does settle.
Yeah, I remember just shortly after the referendum, someone at The Guardian said to me, oh, what will you write about in 6 months when it's all over? And I remember thinking, I don't actually feel it will be over in 6 months. But even I did not believe that I'd be sitting here 6 years later saying, well, I mean, if anything, it's getting worse.
I always think that I feel incredibly sorry for political correspondents who have not had a break since 2015.
Oh, don't worry, they've loved it.
They do look exhausted, though, quite a lot of the time. Yeah, I know. I mean, maybe it's been
very good for business.
Misplaced sympathy.
Very good for business. Not actual business, but for our business, yes.
We have got, I never leave enough time for questions, and I know you're going to have lots of questions for Marina. So we've probably got a good 10 minutes if we start now. If you have some questions, and we can get the microphones back out here, and I will try and pick people who I haven't picked yet. If you want to put your hands up and ask a question. Right behind you, thank you, just there, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much. I was wondering what you're hopeful about.
Oh, God. Well, I mean, I'm hopeful about, as I said, I'm hopeful in all sorts of things I see in sectors outside politics. I've seen so many amazing things in the voluntary sector. I've seen so many sort of interesting, amazing cultural things, big things in aid. I do worry that it's not within politics, which seems to be becoming almost narrower and narrower, and the same old people and the same ideas. But outside, I feel very positive. And I think, and so if we just could find a way to marry the two things.
Anyone else? At the back there, thank you. Yeah, it would be nice to start from a position of what we have in common sometimes, wouldn't it?
Yes.
In discussions, which we don't seem to be able to do very often. But then there's no conflict for social media that way, is there?
Thanks. Is Donald Trump returning to Twitter a threat to democracy or a guilty pleasure?
Oh God, it's a great. I mean, a friend of mine said to me really quite soon after he'd gone, "Oh, I miss him." At some level he is quite funny, but obviously awful and a monster. I don't know. I mean, we'll see. Has he said anything yet?
I don't think he. No, I don't.
No, he says I'll give him like 20 minutes before he does. He's a man of appetites. I mean, he won't be able to control it. But yeah, I wonder how long he'll not be able to tweet something because he wants to stay on his platform that no one's on. Yes, I mean, it's hard to know how that. I mean, I still think he could get the nomination, and I know that it might not look like that at the moment. But I don't make any predictions at all but it's not really the fact of him being on Twitter, is it? That's the threat. The trouble is, there's so much rot there in the sense of misinformation, completely siloed communities who just now think that everything that media tells them is a lie, because in fact the media have failed them on lots of issues. I think those are the things that, in all honesty, are the real threat to democracy. In a way, that's just a sort of sideshow, and it's just, in a way, a sort of lost leader for Musk's platform to get him. He must have his biggest star tweet. I wonder if he'll be able to cope with not being the biggest star of the platform, Elon Musk.
Wasn't it something like 80% of his followers were bots? Elon Musk's own followers.
Were they?
Yeah, there was something that's on that the other day. Let's turn the question back to you. Is it a guilty pleasure for you, or do you think he's a threat? That's all right, we can still hear you. I will interpret.
There's quite a level of enjoyment of
Yeah.
somebody being
Yeah. I know. I mean, it's not our fault. Yeah.
Does it?
Ultimately, he's a showman.
There's
Good point.
somebody there, thank you, and then gentleman there, and then one right at the back, if we can, thank you. And then does another hand go up over here? Yeah, thank you, Richard.
What do you think about moving Parliament somewhere that's not London?
Oh my God, it's literally falling down. Why don't they do it? It would be brilliant. They should definitely do it. And it is, honestly, I've read so many articles of this over the year. I mean, it could just collapse all in on them, which would be dreadful. But it really could. It's such a dangerous structure. The fire, everything, and it's going to cost so much money. I mean, does feel like a huge metaphor when you just see it kind of creaking away and just sort of taped together. Yes, I think that in the very long time it's going to take them to fix it, it should definitely go somewhere else. Go north.
Where would you put it?
I think they should. I don't know. I mean, where do you think?
Where would you put it?
People have said.
I live in Liverpool.
Yeah, Liverpool.
Yeah.
Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool. Just out of London would be good.
Thanks. Do you think two things, the current system of leaking documents from the government, I mean, before the announcements are made, is a good idea? And secondly, do you think the amount of coverage the media gives to speculation, to speculate what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 days, wouldn't it be better just to wait until the things occurred before you start reporting on it?
I've literally got a whole bit in my book about this. Yes, I totally agree on your second half of your question. Yes, why has journalists become... I think journalism has become about predicting what's going to happen next. These endless flow charts that never really pan out how they say they will. I honestly believe that journalists lost the news in 2016, and because this massive thing happened that they hadn't predicted, it's almost like a cargo cult now. They keep laying down what's supposed to happen next in the hope that they will, the news will come back to heel and do what they want it to again. I'm hugely against journalists making all these predictions all the time and tell you what's going to happen next. Analyse what has happened. I think that would be much better. And so much, in a way, has been left unanalysed because we've all been caught up in this kind of frenetic, kind of dopamine chase over the last few years. In the first bit of the question, yes, I hate all the trailing of the information beforehand. It just makes sort of 3 days of it. I can see why the people in charge do it, because you get 3 days out of it, and journalists need a story, and it kind of helps everyone. But like a lot of sort of political coverage, I sometimes think, could this not have been done in an email? I mean, sometimes I look at a politics show and think, just do it in an email. You haven't answered the question. You've just said whatever it is you want to do and got your talking points out. It's all such a sort of pageant that they might as well have just stayed at home and just put a repeat on instead and just put it all out in an email, which you can read or not. So I'm against, both of those things I think we could do with much less of.
Where were we? There we are.
Thank you. Despite Gianni Infantino's plea to keep politics out of sport, do we think sport can get any more political than the current World Cup?
It's not possible. It's a geopolitical maneuver. No, sport is always political from the people who are, those mega events in particular, where they are, I mean, the worst sporting, the race to be the worst sporting body in the world is the most tightly fought sporting contest in my lifetime. FIFA versus the IOC. There's been nothing like it. There's never been a rivalry like it. But so where you put those events is obviously a huge political decision. The way they behave, the sort of dignitaries and the people involved in it, it's all political. So the idea that the person at, I don't want to say the bottom of the food chain because it's the only reason we're watching, but the idea that you then say the athlete, you can't do anything, is so preposterous to me, and it always has been. And I think it's ridiculous to try and, manage it. Nothing is more political than these things. I mean, when Putin had the Winter Games, he used them as a sort of curtain raiser for invading Crimea. I mean, sorry, I think once you've got, that ship has sailed at that point.
Marina, it's wonderful that you're acknowledging how diverse the adversary politics that we have to live with is so destructive. And also acknowledgement of the areas of common ground between the parties. Do you think proportional representation would help?
So many people have been asking me this over the last few weeks on my tour. It's like a question that everyone's... I feel like it's not going to happen. If I want to go back to the arguments because the last time when we had the last referendum, it was a very long time ago, and I'd love to see it sort of litigated in terms of the arguments again for now. I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, if once anyone wins with a big majority, you never hear of it again until they feel there's no other way they can win. So. But I think it would be definitely good to talk about different ways of doing things. I'm for all, sensible public debates about different ways of doing things, because I don't think all sorts of things we're doing in the present are not working.
Is that what you'd be in favour of, Richard? PR?
I'd be in favour. I'd be in favour of anything that brings people together to tackle the big issues. And I find it so frustrating to see areas of common interest, I mean, the health service, education, there's a huge amount of common ground, and yet you can't get politicians to agree from the different sides.
It's just so pointless, and it's obviously totally sort of counterproductive. And but it's so easy to do. It's become a very easy way of doing politics to sort of, that adversarial, particularly, that, as I was saying, that thing of, riling your base. It's a small amount of people, and it's by no means a majority, but to have a small amount of people desperately on your side is clearly a lot easier than doing the hard work of making a majority of people come near to your side. And that seems to me where we've been stuck for quite a long time.
Do we have any more questions? One here. It's not about a dog getting on a bus, is it? Last question, thank you.
So obviously, as a satirist, do you feel it's a motivation that you provide entertainment to people in such dark times, or do you feel it as a burden that you are constantly expected to keep people interested in this extremely toxic environment? Like, for example, comedians like Jon Stewart are now expected to be more sensible than politicians themselves, which is what's happening. So is it a burden or is it a motivation for you as a satirist or a comedian, if I would like to say?
That's very kind of it. It's a good question. I don't think it's just a trade. I'm trying to do my best. I'm trying to make people laugh. And it's cathartic for me to try and think about the joke sometimes about a difficult situation, or to think this is a really unpleasant and dreadful story, but if I can maybe get more people's attention onto it if I make them laugh about it at the start before I do something more serious at the end, or something like that. So it's a very useful way in some ways of... Humour is a great defensive response in life, and perhaps in print, and it's been a good defensive response, I think, to people, lots of people who feel that politics has been done to them over the last few years rather than done in their name.
Thank you very much for all of your questions. If you would like to buy a copy of Marina's book, What Just Happened, you can do so for the next hour. They're outside. Hatchards have arrived with the truck. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
And indeed, thank you very much to all of our speakers and contributors that we've heard from today. The events like this only happen because they're prepared to come along and entertain us in some form or another. Thank you too to the CPP and to the team in particular responsible for putting together this first in-person and streamed Inclusive Growth Conference since 2020. Let me name them: Raquel Aguirre, Grace Hetherington, Sarah O'Donnell, Kate Spiliopoulos, and Samantha Blake, who's been at the front there with her pieces of paper telling us to stop. And thank you to all of you for being here today and coming along and spending the time with us. Maybe you're coming back next year if you've enjoyed it sufficiently. I think we've earned refreshments. Don't dash off. Drinks are being served outside. Have a very good evening. Thank you. Thanks. It's a pleasure.